webinar, Maximizing Your Return on Inclusion, Onboarding Refugees. My name is Natalia Angheli-Zaicenco, and I'm Communications Manager at the Immigrant Employment Council of British Columbia. With us today is Christian Codrington, who is Principal of Forum HCM. Good morning, Christian, and welcome.
Good morning, Natalia, and good morning to everyone listening in. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you.
Christian has an extensive and varied human resources background. He has worked with a variety of organizations in a number of sectors, such as the Human Resources Management Association, Starbucks Coffee Canada, Best Buy Canada, Children's and Women's Health Centre of BC, and Service Canada. Christian has been part of teams that developed a variety of solutions to a number of complex human resource challenges, and those range from international as well as mass recruitment, coaching leaders and staff, and negotiating collective agreements. He has also created and implemented a lot of learning and development initiatives.
Thank you very much, Natalia. As we were preparing for today's session, I couldn't help but reflect. What we're going to share is a number of insights, but they really come down to good, effective human resource management principles. And I think as long as you're willing to be a bit flexible with your systems, put in a little bit of extra work to maximize your return from this really interesting, select, and in some cases, very valuable group of employees that can help any organization.
Well, we're so happy to have you here. And Christian, as you know, IEC-BC continues to support employers in their commitment to diversity and inclusion, and that is exactly why we are hosting this webinar. And let me just say that today, our purpose is to raise employer awareness about onboarding tools and resources available from our organization, those tools and resources that can help you in your efforts to attract and retain this unique group of the labor pool. You know, refugees are a unique source of labor. They are good for your business, and they are good for your entire workforce. And just wanted to let you know that a lot of the information for this webinar has been drawn from the Onboarding Syrian Refugees, a toolkit for employers that IEC-BC published earlier this year. But we will also be referencing other available resources and best practices. A few words about the agenda for today. We will start by providing a snapshot of BC's current refugee population. We will then continue with an overview of 5 areas that we feel are good practices to apply when dealing with this population of refugees, those refugees who are trying to integrate into the BC labor market. And we will wrap up with a summary and possible next steps. And Christian will contribute his experiences for much of the webinar. We will take questions throughout this session, and we will also have some time for them at the end. You can type your questions as you have them, and we will do our best to respond. In total, we have 1 hour and 15 minutes together. Refugee arrivals in BC. There are currently 1,516 government-assisted refugees, which is 434 family units, and those are the refugees that have arrived from January to September 2016. Once again, these are the government-assisted refugees. The statistics that we are using today are thanks to the ISS of BC. And the profiles of refugees are as diverse in skills and backgrounds as the current BC labor market. Those range from low and semi-skilled to foreign-trained professionals. Here we can take a look at the demographic, the current demographics of the refugees. And you see that actually 55% are of working age. Those who are eager to contribute to the country that has welcomed them and has offered them protection.
And a valuable source for the employers on our call today.
Absolutely. And top destinations. Most of the refugees are currently based in Surrey, followed by Burnaby, and there's a few other pockets where refugees are currently compactly residing. Clearly, finding meaningful employment is a big thing.
Well, there's a couple things that jump out at me from those statistics, Natalia. One is you just talked about government-assisted refugees. We still have private sponsored ones.
Absolutely.
Those numbers that you showed are just a fraction of the total numbers coming from.
Absolutely.
So employers need to remember that. But you know, the slide up on the screen right now brings me to my second point. If viewers get a chance to look at that document, it's really interesting to see that more than 50% of the newcomers to Canada state that their biggest or their highest challenge was finding meaningful employment when they came to Canada. So it just takes me back to a story that a friend of mine shared. Her family fled Uganda in 1972 out of Idi Amin's regime, and her father's first job was as a security guard here in Canada. After that, he moved over to a manager at 7-Eleven. Previously, they owned and operated a large multinational restaurant and food services organization in Uganda. And she remembers the tension and difficulties in their household as their parents tried to find meaningful and rewarding work. And as it turns out, within 2 years of their arrival, the family then purchased a food chain. And that food chain still exists today, and the family still operates, and it continues to grow. And she carries with her now as a manager those experiences. And she says to me, give people the opportunity to show what they can do, and you'll be rewarded with surprising results. A stable workforce and really happy and diverse customers. So I just stress to employers that it does take some work, and that investment will pay off for you in the long term.
And today we are particularly interested in what employers can do to welcome this unique labor force and source of labor force, and how to integrate them integrate this unique talent pool into their productive workforce.
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the head around what businesses can do. What we've got here is a very multifaceted and complex issue. The assimilation of refugees and immigrants into our country. Governments are doing their part. Service providers play an important role, and as you say, today is about what we can do to help support businesses in tapping into this labor pool. So,
So, Christian, what are some of the things that businesses can actually do to help integrate refugees into their workforces and places of business?
Well, today I think what we're going to try and do is cover rather quickly 5 key areas. Things around credential recognition and language support. We'd like to talk a little bit about addressing workplace culture and how important that can be to assimilating any new employee, not just a refugee, but any new employee into your place of business. And then we'd like to talk a little bit about what we call family-friendly and facilitating a family-friendly workplace. We'll briefly touch on some occupational health and safety issues, and then I think we'll close with a discussion around religious accommodation.
Wow, that looks like a full agenda for today.
You know, I want to stress that we're just starting the discussion, and what we'd like to do is try and point you in the direction of a number of resources that can help you answer some questions. So again, we're going to have to briefly go into things and rely on the ingenuity and the resourcefulness of the audience to find some additional resources.
And let me just interject by saying that following this webinar, we will be providing our participants with tip sheets and a whole other range of resources that they can use to implement these best practices and integrate the refugee talent pool effectively.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So let's start with this issue of credentials.
Yes, credential recognition.
You know, the first thing I want to do is say that they're trying to put some of the onus back on the individual job seeker. You know, WorkBC offers a variety of resources to assist people in making it easy for an employer to understand what their qualifications are and to help put them in the best light possible. So let's start with pointing people back to the WorkBC resources. Put some onus on the service providers as well as the individual job seeker to make it easy for employers. Second, I don't think I need to remind this audience, I'm sure they're very familiar with a group called the International Credential Evaluation Service. Now, I will point out that that is a BC-specific organization, and it's centered out of the BCIT institution here in Burnaby. Not every province has a centrally controlled spot for credential recognition. So I want to point out that this is a BC-specific resource. But as we were going through their website, what struck me is the note that they particularly put right now around the challenge of getting information out of Syrian institutions. In essence, what they're saying is they can't guarantee being able to conduct assessments right now through the Syrian institutions, academic institutions. They go so far as to say that while they're slowly receiving information out of Damascus, anything out of Aleppo has ceased. So that sort of segues nicely into what we really recommend. And
yeah, so what can they actually do? Are there any alternatives?
Well, we underscore in the toolkit the importance of how can you be flexible in your assessment process? Can we look at transferable skills rather than screening on education and certifications? Now, I acknowledge that this takes a little bit more effort. Competency-based hiring. Can you provide supervised areas where a new hire can show you what they do and maybe skip the paperwork and the interview? And one of the other things that sort of came to mind for me was something that I think you pointed out to me around what some of the European countries are doing as a result of the large influx of refugees. They've introduced tailored recognition programs for refugees. And I believe the link for that article is up, or will be up on the screen shortly.
Yeah, we will share this link as a tip sheet.
But what they're doing is relying on individual interviews alongside expert panels and competency tests and witness testimony to make up for any missing documentation. And in some cases, what they're doing is bringing in other members of the business community to certify the value of the skills these individuals are bringing in absence of any institution and certified acknowledgement.
Yeah, but it has just struck me. How about regulated professions? That might probably not work.
Yeah, I mean, we have to acknowledge that those that are self-regulated or those that are regulated, this can be a challenge. I keep coming back to those organizations are made up of members, and those members can create change if that change is necessary. And I'm struck, my professional association recently changed its paths to obtain its credential recognition, and they've increased the number of ways in which you can get the designation, including recognizing foreign work experience. So that came as a result of new leadership, as well as requests from the business and professional community to open things up. So as a business, I want to stress that you can influence your professional association, and while it's slower, you can change, if you will, the requirements for those certifications. That's
very interesting. I'm wondering if any of our participants might have some questions about credential recognitions and anything we have, any other material we have already covered. So let's just see if there are any questions, and we'll have a few minutes to discuss them, and then we can move on to other buckets.
Sure. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing what participants have to say. I mean, we are just briefly touched on the issue. And in absence of any questions, what I'd like to get into next is talking a little bit about more of a qualification rather than a credential. And I'd like to figure out how we can talk a little bit about the issue of communication skills. But perhaps we'll just hang on just a second.
So do we have any questions?
Coming in?
No? All right, excellent. Great. Well, I hope there will be questions later on. So to our participants, we will have another, and we'll have two other specific mini sessions for these questions within this webinar today. So yes, I guess we can move on, and we'll reply to the questions later on. So yeah, you were just saying that.
Yeah, as I was mentioning, Natalia, I think, well, not a credential. This qualification around effective oral and written communication is a big one. We operate in an environment where English, for the most part, is our primary language of communication.
Yes, and we know that the primary language spoken, for example, by 90% of Syrian refugees is Arabic. So English proficiency can be an issue.
Certainly, certainly. I want to remind the group of the Center for Canadian Language Benchmarks. They offer free e-learning for HR professionals, as well as employers and assessors. And what I really like is if you get a chance to go through the site, and the link is provided up on the slide there, is their can-do statements. And these can-do statements are a way, and a useful way, to help determine the actual language requirements of a position. So we know that many Syrian refugees are likely to obtain basic language skills from the Government of Canada, such as the Resettlement Assistance Program. However, there are long wait lists. So some refugees may not be able to attend classes and have to attend informal classes through their community or cultural organizations.
Yes, and I believe we have actually a question that is very relevant. As part of their credential recognition, is there document translation at BCIT? Do we know that?
I'm afraid I'm not in a position to answer that at this point, but I know that they're providing a variety of services. So again, I just stress that our audience check in directly with the center and see what services they can get from that.
Okay. Well, what else can be done? So we
were talking a little bit about language, and what I want to point something out. As we've been touching base with many of the employers here, what I'm struck by is the number of employers who are choosing to hire for technical skills and then taking on the investment themselves or the time to train people in the English language. Whereas often I'm seeing it flipped around, people saying, if you can't speak English, we can't have you. No, they're saying if you have the technical skills, and obviously this relates to the competency-based sort of assessment where you're seeing what someone can do. In absence of those language skills, they're saying, we see that the person has the other technical skills to do what's required in this job. We're prepared to invest in English language training.
So it's basically critical skills and non-critical skills. Those that are critical for the job and those that are not critical on the job.
The other piece, I think, related to critical and non-critical is they're looking to their current base of employees, either as buddies or buddy pods, to assist in that English language training. And I just find that, creative, it's innovative, and it's simple. So a really easy tactic for many employers to help bring this population up to speed.
Yeah. And I believe another important thing is workplace culture. It's so different. I must say that I am an immigrant myself. Fairly new to Canada, less than 10 years here. Yep. And I must say that understanding workplace culture, the norms, especially the unspoken norms, has been probably the biggest challenge integrating into Canadian society. So workplace culture, especially with this very specific and very unique labor pool.
I think workplace culture, I was struck by this topic because I remember, and having been born and raised here in Vancouver, what a shock it was for me to move from one organization to another. This particular organization, a very strong customer service culture and a very strong interpersonal communication between staff culture. And it was alarming for me. And that was for someone that had worked all my life in Canada. So I can't stress enough, as you mentioned, the nuances of workplace culture and how vital it is. So I start with, how do you prepare your existing workforce for newcomers that may need a little extra support to understand that culture? How do you help them nurture along your newcomers? And whether or not that's assigning one person as a buddy to say, here's the lunchroom, here's a good restaurant, here's a not so good restaurant. Just helping someone immerse into that culture is critical. The other piece, not just talking about your current staff and what they can do to assimilate, but cultures vary widely, and the community that we're welcoming in has different approaches to verbal and nonverbal communication, personal space, things like hierarchy, teamwork, initiative. And whether it's Syrian refugees or remember years ago the Vietnamese refugee crisis,
Yeah, for those people.
These are individuals coming from a different cultural dynamic, and we need to appreciate those norms of behavior, help with the communication, maybe just slow things down a little bit, talk a little bit more about the breaks, our social conversations, help educate people around the local hockey team, for example, so they can have water cooler conversation and meeting etiquette. So I want to stress that talking and inquiring about what's appropriate is not offensive when done in a respectful manner. And partner up with your agencies who are supporting these employees and supporting these individuals, and help get some coaching from the different agencies, and that will go a long way. Just simply asking questions, it doesn't offend or belittle.
All right, it looks like we have a very interesting and relevant question. It's from one of our participants. So can we get suggestions or input on how to provide cultural norms training without offending? For example, talking about personal space in conversation without belittling, etc.
Yeah, as I was mentioning before, I want to stress the importance of simply asking questions. Is it okay? And when someone says it's not okay or they don't understand, then that's a learning for everybody. And again, I come back to the service providers who are a really valuable resource for employers to understand what's appropriate from certain cultures. So yourself here, the Immigrant Service Society, there are a number of resources in every community that can help employers to understand what's appropriate and what's not appropriate for these different cultures. So don't think you need to do this and become an expert by yourself.
Yeah, and it's actually very interesting because we're so diverse, and I found Canadian workplaces fantastically diverse. But people's histories, people's backgrounds are amazing, amazingly diverse. And there also might be that there is a resource available within the organization already. Somebody who either comes from the same culture or shares or has been to these countries, somebody who can sometimes shed the light.
Sure, and again, I want to stress groups like the Immigrant Services Society of BC, they offer free courses to permanent residents to cover things like soft skills and understanding workplace Canadian culture. So these individuals are getting supported on that side. Employers can find a lot of support from different organizations like yourself.
Yeah, so let's talk more about employers and what can be done. It's something interesting you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion. You were talking about family-friendly workplaces. What is that? Family picnics or what?
Sure. Well, I'm not sure that it's as simple as family picnics, but that's a good segue into a story. I'm working with a client right now who's recently hired 3 individuals to his company. One of these is from Montreal, one's from Atlanta, Georgia, and a third is moving from Brazil. So our new hire from Atlanta recently arrived at the Canadian border on the day before the Canadian Thanksgiving. So of course my client picks him up at the border and takes him to his home, and they share a Thanksgiving dinner.
That's probably quite surprising to eat turkey 1 month earlier.
And coming exactly, and getting a second helping of turkey in a week's time. And so what I mean by family-friendly workplace is characterized by that example. What can you do to kind of go that extra step and lend an extra hand?
It's always very interesting, those extra steps. It sounds very easy and very nice, but just wondering if this might result in feelings of unfairness or perceptions of inequity among other employees.
Well, why don't we dig a bit deeper into some of the solutions and see if that will provide an answer to your question. One of the things that I found rather interesting in preparation for today's discussion was a parallel between what companies used to do with their expat or expatriated employees' assignments and refugees. So prior to 2000, many larger companies were sending senior leaders to foreign countries to help build their qualifications and develop them, and of course grow their business. There was a recent study by the Harvard Business Review. It was called The Right Way to Manage Expats. And the link will be on the screen. But the writers found that nearly 1/3 of the leaders put into these assignments didn't perform up to expectations. They couldn't manage in their new country. Now, I grant it may be difficult to see similarities between refugees coming to Canada and an expat on a senior manager assignment. But there are some parallels that I'd like to sort of try and draw some of those parallels. One thing that I think to keep in mind is there are many things swirling around in the background in the personal lives of these individuals for hire. So anything you can do to sort of positively impact that will help you in your workplace investment.
And can you provide some additional examples?
Sure. Well, I mean, many companies provide assistance in understanding finances. So keep in mind, it's a new country, different currency, things like financial aid, medical insurance coverage. Those are all different than what individuals are used to.
Oh, absolutely. And this can be really overwhelming.
Right. So something as simple as maybe a lunch and learn to help staff understand things like financial literacy, understand the deductions on their pay, understand non-wage benefits like RRSPs. I recall when I was working at one employer, we used to give stock options to staff, and the staff never used them.
Mm-hmm.
And when we went out and asked staff what was going on, you're getting free money here, they would say, I don't understand it. Mm-hmm. So all we had to do was...
And I don't blame them.
And it was, unfortunately, young people are losing opportunities to get free money from a company simply because they didn't understand how to exercise an option. So a lunch and learn and regular lunch and learns really helped increase usage of that benefit. And such initiatives can help all your employees, not just the individuals that are refugees to Canada. Right? Another item that the writers from that Harvard Business Review talked about was something that they called broad-based sociability.
Broad-based sociability. Now, what is that?
Simply put, do you have a strong network?
Oh, I see.
Do you have a broad base of social network? And for many, when you're new to Canada, the answer is no. So I take that one step further and say, can we take the buddy system that we have at work and find a way to translate that into personal lives? How can we help family members adjust to their new environment here in Canada? How do we help them increase their circle of friends, their supports, their families? When my parents moved here from Trinidad, it was just them. Family was back in Trinidad. They were by themselves. Anything from trying to find a babysitter to choosing a good restaurant to go out to. So it certainly helped when they had neighbors helping them adjust to the new neighborhood. You know, it strikes me from a parallel. The Gallup organization, many of our listeners know about them. They do employee engagement surveys. And one of the questions on their engagement survey is, I have a best friend at work. Mm-hmm. And we have to be careful we don't take that question too literally. But what they're trying to get at there is, do you feel comfortable and have the support of your coworkers? Take that best friend at work and translate that out into, how can I get supported in the neighborhood that I work in? So that's what I call increasing your base of sociability.
Interesting.
Another piece that the writers really recommend is, how can you assist the trailing spouse? Help this trailing spouse understand their nuances of being in this new environment. Now, in some communities, that support to trailing spouse actually extends into helping them find work. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go that far, but how can you help your spouse or the trailing spouse acclimatize and perhaps even socialize? So related to that broad base of sociability.
Well, they say that peer pressures at home certainly contribute to clarity of focus at work.
And I think that's the point you asked earlier around, is this unfair to do this extra work for this particular group? And I come at it from a more like a leveling the playing field. We're all coming at this work dynamic with different experiences, a different network. And what an employer is trying to do is level that playing field or bring everybody up to the same level so that they can do their best for the employer. And when I look at it from that perspective, I don't see that as unfair at all.
Oh.
I see that as clearing the way for my employees to do their best.
All right, yeah, absolutely. I think it's time for us to break up the discussion a little bit and see if there are any additional questions from our participants. Okay, do we have some questions from employers? All right. So I guess we can move on then.
Just making it easy on us here.
I guess.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this issue of safety in the workplace. Yes. And I'd like to break the safety discussion up into two parts, if you will. Let's start with physical safety, and then just for simplicity, then talk a little bit more about emotional safety. And the issue of workplace safety, I was struck by a paper that IEC-BC has put out, and it's entitled Immigrant Workers' Experiences After Work-Related Injury. And when you read the paper, you see just some really basic nuances that can contribute to a problem. What they found is that immigrant as well as refugee workers are more likely than Canadian workers to be in lower paying jobs. Second, they're more likely to be in jobs that require higher physical demands. And therefore the conclusion is increased risk of work-related injuries. Now, when you add in sort of lower job security, poor English skills, and limited familiarity with the Canadian social programs like IEC-BC, there's a particular challenge in reporting. So we may have a situation where individuals are afraid to report an accident, afraid to report an injury for fear of losing work, working while hurt, and potentially creating difficulties for their coworkers. So again, I come back to the importance of buddy systems and helping people understand the importance of it's okay to report and here's how to report. So things that we may take for granted for some other segments of our work population are things that we may need to slow down and explain to this particular population. I think it's vital that we're regularly checking in and having colleagues check in to make sure people are doing okay on the job.
Yes, absolutely.
And then the other piece is, and I'm seeing fewer and fewer employers do this, is be cognizant of what we reinforce and recognize. Remember the days when you used to put up a workplace free from accidents sign for some employers. That can incent safety, but it may also create a situation where people are not reporting incidents at work. So we need to be careful.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say that the toolkit that IEC-BC currently has on the website also addresses aspects of occupational health and safety.
Yeah, and I can't stress that enough too. So again, a great resource for people. We need to make sure.
So we talked about we talked about physical safety, but how about emotional safety? We all agree that, and we all have heard that many refugees have had some horrifying experiences.
Yeah, I mean, we can't listen to a news tapcast one day without hearing something out of Syria, Damascus, for example. So this PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, it's a serious condition, and it can develop when people are experienced or witness to such traumatic or horrifying events. I think it's really important to remember that while it's our desire to sort of protect our investment in these individuals, we have to be cautious how far we stretch ourselves. At the end, we're an employer. It's important that we educate ourselves and our staff around the signs to look for PTSD, but beyond that, it's about referring out and recommending to people resources where they can get some help. So I think we've got a couple of resources up on the website, up on the slides right now. The Association of Canada, the PTSD Association also has an interesting checklist that can help employers look for signs. People withdrawing from the workplace, having troubles concentrating. All those are potential signs. But again, I want to stress to an employer, we're not in the spot to be diagnosing these things. We're just there to look out for and potentially refer off to someone who's more qualified.
You know, we'll be talking about, I would like us to talk about the issue of prayers and accommodations around religious observances. But before we do that, there's actually a very interesting question that has just popped out in response to our section on workplace culture. And the question is, it would be common for people of same cultures to stay together in the workplace. In your experience, does this alienate the rest of the staff? Does it stunt any opportunity to assimilate?
Yeah, I mean, let's start with why people are congregating together with people that are familiar to them. It's comforting, it's helpful, it's first language, it's appreciation of culture. So all the things we talked about earlier around helping, maybe not break down those sense of security or those barriers, but welcoming people in by approaching individuals or groups. And if you as an employer are big enough to have hired 3, 4, 5 folks from one particular segment or culture or population, I think it's okay. We don't necessarily want to break up what is comforting, but I think we need to find ways that are appropriate, and there's no clear line here. We have to find ways that are appropriate to make it easy for those individuals to step out of their comfort zone and find out what it's like to be in a Canadian culture that's multicultural, has a variety of different segments of the population, where they can share their experiences and they can be open to what we have to share as well.
Thank you so much, Christian. We will now move on to reasonable accommodation.
The interesting reasonable accommodation. Now, what we've got to acknowledge here first is that we're not lawyers.
Absolutely, we are definitely not
lawyers.
And
we can't give legal advice. So what I'd like to acknowledge is that we all know that as an employer, you have a positive duty to accommodate your employees, and especially on religious observances. So what we're talking about here is to what degree does an employer have to go to meet someone's need or requirement to pray? Well, let's just break that down a little bit. This can be a sensitive and perhaps even frustrating issue for an employer. Because unlike color, sex, and other prohibited grounds of discrimination, religion and creed can appear to be a choice. People don't choose the color of their skin, but they're choosing to observe a prayer in the middle of your shift. Well, I think, first of all, it's important to remember that courts have really, really rejected this issue of choice being less worthy when it comes to accommodation. Simply because you choose to do something is no grounds to discriminate them for that choice. For example, religious practice or creed. Second, the courts also talked about no human right is more important than another. They're all on equal footing. There's no hierarchy. And simply because one's protected ground of discrimination is beyond their control doesn't make it more important than something that someone chooses. So at the end of the day, it's really important to remember that prayer, like every other protected ground under the human rights legislation, is something that employers need to accommodate around. The need to accommodate time off for religious beliefs, like Sabbath prayers, has been repeatedly confirmed. And what's most complex here is determine whether or not they're entitled to receiving pay while having the time off.
Yeah, and I believe we have an additional slide on that, yes.
So it's important to remember that the Muslim faith has prayers, their Salah prayers, which occur 5 times a day. One prayer occurs before sunrise, a second in the early afternoon, a third in the early evening, and then 2 more at night. So in the typical workday, for your 9 to 5 shift, there's probably 2 prayers that may need to be accommodated. These prayers take about 10 minutes to complete. Now, in most environments, Muslim employees choosing to practice their prayer will be able to pray during typical break times. The challenge obviously becomes those companies that have more rigid break schedules, like construction or factory workers, and where time for prayers can only be possible on scheduled breaks. It's acknowledged that it's not reasonable to pause an assembly line for a shift schedule to meet prayer times. So it's important that we have safety first, and during a prayer, employees aren't really supposed to be responding to verbal discussions. However, prayers can be and should be interrupted in the event of an emergency.
All right, and I believe we have a question on this. Muslims do ask for 1 hour of time after prayer on Fridays. How do you interpret this? Reasonable accommodation or otherwise?
Well, again, the reasonable accommodation is something that we need to be really careful of. What's reasonable for one employer might not be reasonable for another. So again, I want to say consult with your lawyers around what's reasonable for your workplace. Accept the request, say you're concentrating on finding a solution, and then determine what is reasonable for your workplace. I can't answer whether or not 1 hour for this employer is reasonable for all employers. So again, it's important that each employer take those requests and consider it before dismissing it out of hand, and that way you will be free from any charge of discrimination. And then provide a thorough and well-versed answer to whatever operationally you can or cannot accommodate for that request.
Yes, and I believe we will have a couple of links, a couple of useful resources that we can share with webinar participants after the webinar as part of the tip sheets, part of the additional resources.
And again, the challenge here is that what we all want is a really clear answer. And each answer depends on the context and the situation that the employer is in. So again, we're not lawyers, and we don't want to profess to be lawyers. Have a look at those references that we put up, and where possible, just consult with a lawyer.
Yeah, and I believe the participant who just the previous question just provided a little bit more information about the nature of their business, saying that they are a production warehouse workforce. Yeah, these are the additional details.
So again, what we've gone through is really quickly these 4 areas.
I think it's even 5. Yes, exactly.
5 areas. We added the workplace culture. So the credential recognition, workplace culture, this family-friendly workplace, the safety issue, and religious accommodation. And we have tried to go through it quickly, but I think we provided a lot of resources for people to do some additional research, and hope that we've sort of sparked some discussion.
Yes, thank you so much. We do have time for questions, and we do hope that those 5 theme buckets that we have talked about have spurred your interest, and that you might have some additional comments and some additional questions. So we will open up the floor to questions right now. And while we are doing this, I would like to remind our participants that a lot of the information we discussed today is available on IEC-BC's Onboarding Syrian Refugees Toolkit. So this is currently available on the website, and we're also working on revising it as new resources, tools, and new practices become available. Because a lot has changed since we created this resource in response to the first wave of refugee arrivals in BC.
Yeah, and I think you've really hit the nail on the head around new resources. I think, well, this is new for some employers. So I think as we hear more and more employer experiences, we'll be able to share what's worked, what's been a challenge, and resources that can help other employers.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the main learning for me today was, but again, I'm not an HR practitioner, is that a lot of things that are relevant for this labor pool actually come from general HR practices. Certain things quite a lot of specifics actually arise from generalities, arise from the common sense, from the universally available best practices. So, Christian, what do you think?
Yeah, as we mentioned to start, there's good HR practices, and then it's just going that extra step, a little bit more creativity, being able to be flexible on some of your policies. And what I mean by that is, you know, rather than the online written application, can you accept someone in person who wants to apply? So just a willingness to be flexible around some of those good HR practices can help go a long way in accommodating this unique workforce.
And I believe we have a question regarding the hiring of Syrian refugees whose English language proficiency is not yet too high, and the reference is to CLB levels 1 or 2. And the comment is actually that the employers have successfully used the buddy system to communicate between cohorts of refugees. But the actual question is that how about health and safety? So what consideration should the lack of English language proficiency be given as when it relates to health and safety conditions? So how do you suggest communicating health and safety issues to Syrian refugees?
Well, again, keep in mind, we're not putting anybody in a situation that's going to be dangerous for them. As an employer, we owe that. So if we were unable to get a translator to help communicate our safety practices, then we have to find alternatives. Whether or not that's a buddy, as the question was referenced, or some other form of communication, whether it's visual or again, going back to the service provider, see what bridge they can help in communicating. We just can't put people in an unsafe situation because they don't understand the English language and the requirements of operating. So demonstrate in a safe environment, perhaps get a translator. Again, we'll refer back to the buddy and your service providers. Remember that, so those groups can all do it. I think it's critical.
Yes, thank you, Christian. And all right, and then there's actually a comment. One thing to mention is the many benefits of hiring Syrian newcomers. Most of them do not believe in drinking alcohol, and they are very creative and innovative, especially in construction, warehouse, trade positions. And all right, and I believe it's an onus on organizations that interact with employers like IEC-BC that highlighting the benefits for employers is definitely key. Yes, absolutely. Wow, absolutely.
Well, and I think there's been much written about the benefits, and we've chosen to use our time carefully here today. There are many benefits, and they're well documented, and I think the group on the call today are here because they realize those benefits. Anything from tenure to creativity, opening up your customer base, creating a more diverse group of employees to develop solutions to problems. Those have been well documented, and I'm glad the question was brought up as a statement. So
yes, well, yes, thank you for this one. Absolutely. And here's another question. Are there any resources that are capturing examples of employers' best practices in integrating the recent influx of refugees? Do you have any examples of employers that stand out in this process? Well, this is very new. This is all very new. You know, Canada has welcomed over 30,000 Syrian refugees to date, and we are still amassing the experiences. Yeah. We are working with employers to identify those best practices, and some of those best practices are actually, some of those stories are already available in the toolkit. Yeah. And there are also resources available through our partner organizations and our sister immigrant employment councils in the rest across Canada. And when we are sharing the tip sheets with our participants, we'll definitely mention and reference those. And also, as these resources become available, we are going to circulate them, and we are also going to publish them on our website. So what I would actually suggest for employers who are joining us, that for this particular information, for this particular resource and knowledge, please visit our website often, because IEC-BC's website has a fairly robust tools and resources section, which we update regularly with resources that are responses to current challenges and current things that might be both of interest and might be both of importance for employers. And clearly, integrating this unique labor pool into the workforce is one of them.
The issue of, if I could, Natalia, these toolkits are coming out, and these toolkits I'm seeing are highlighting good employers, creative practices. So the one that was produced by IEC-BC, the one produced by the Ontario government as well. Yep. And then I think we've got the link in there to some of the European practices.
Yes, we do.
So that's just a starting point for our audience. And I think, as you mentioned, this is because of its sort of newness, it will continue to evolve. And I think we're looking for employers to share their stories so that we can be, if you will, a bit of a key turn in communicating those practices to other employers.
Yeah, so there's a question, where do refugees go to find work? Where would employers find them?
Well, I mean, employers have their regular posting process. That's the easy portion. Go one step further and reach out to the support agencies that are supporting the refugees themselves, and whether or not it's a group like ISS, the Immigrant Services Society. They have a wealth of folks that are arriving that they're supporting. Each community has some sort of immigrant resettlement program or services. These individuals are looking for work. And I think those are two that come to mind right away.
Yes, and in the new year, we're also expecting to have more resources in this respect. We're hoping to have more resources in this respect, so please check back regularly for new channels, for new pathways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then keep in mind that I think a lot of individuals are going through Work BC and those offices in your community. So again, I'm not sure what the equivalent would be in other provinces, but those sort of employment support groups that are sponsored by the provincial government are seeing those individuals and training those individuals and helping them get out into the workplace. So there we go.
Yes, and actually we have a comment from Work BC in Fleetwood, Guildford in Surrey, and the comment is that there are over 250 Syrian refugees there, and they're noting that they also have 3 Arabic-speaking job counselors helping them find work. So see, there's
question and answer.
Absolutely. All right, and I believe we also have another question about interviewing. Dennis, if you could help pull it down, please. The previous page. Yeah. Yes, thank you so much. So there was actually a question. We talked about credential recognition, and we talked about how to identify the right fit, etc., etc. And the question is, how would a typical interview be conducted with limited common language?
Right. So I think that previous answer helps. Employers, reach out to your Work BC offices that are supporting immigrants in some way, because oftentimes they have translators that can help in your assessment process. So that's a service free to employers. So start with that. I think, again, the Immigrant Services Society of BC also offers some hiring fairs, so employers can meet them there, and I believe there are translators there at those sessions to assist with that language barrier, or that jumping over that language barrier. So again, there's lots of free resources out there for employers.
All right, thank you, Christian. I was wondering if there are any more questions from our participants. Yes, looks like there is, so bear with us as we identify it. Well, I heard about a job portal for refugees. Can you provide more information? So you can currently visit our website, IEC-BC website, for general information about the programs that we have. And so BC Refugees Job Connect is a portal that will be available to employers soon enough. So for the general description, visit with us and stay tuned for more information.
Sounds interesting.
And if you're interested in additional information, please be sure to contact us by email.
So will you be doing push notifications?
Absolutely, absolutely,
absolutely. On this
absolutely.
call?
Absolutely.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
And there's another response there from BC.
All right. So any other questions? Well, on this note, I would like to thank all of our participants for joining in. We were happy to share the tools and resources that we hope will help you in in your commitment, in realizing this commitment, and in continuing this commitment to include Syrian refugees, other refugees into your workforce. And actually, it's always a question of having a productive workforce, right?
Sure.
It's a question to have a diverse and productive workforce, and we do hope that the information that we have shared will be useful. And just to recap, some of the stories, some of the resources, some of the case studies are already available on the website through the Onboarding Syrian Refugees Toolkit. In the coming weeks, we will be sharing tip sheets. Those will come directly into your inbox. Those will be hopefully easy to use and step-by-step solutions for employers interested in effectively onboarding refugees. And be sure to sign up for information about future webinars and other resources on how to include this unique talent pool into your productive website. And yes, the webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on IEC-BC website. Thank you very much. Goodbye, and have a wonderful day.